Here we go. Welcome your hosts, Caddy Frink and Aaron Fitzgerald, as they lead discussions about substance use disorder and the journey to recovery. You're listening to Redefining Recovery, a recovery revolution.
Well. Good day. This is Caddy Frink with Redefining Recovery, a recovery revolution. And Miss Erin Fitzgerald is not with us today, so I have somebody else that is joining us. But before I introduce him, I want to give a special thanks to our generous funders, including Patrick and Amy Butler Foundation, Otto Bremer Trust, the Sawyer Family Foundation, the Hindenburg Foundation, along with many other foundations, corporate and individual contributors to our podcast series because it makes it possible. So across the lovely table from me is a gentleman by the name of Lance Frederick.
Hi, Caddy.
Hi, Frederick. Forget the S. That's what it is. He just told me that just a second ago.
It's normal. It happens all the time.
I bet it does. So I'm welcoming Lance kind of last minute because he's an amazing human. He can adjust his schedule to this program. We're talking about recovery and talking about all the different facets around it. So Lance, how we open this up is I ask you, what is right with you today, my friend?
Well, I'm here, first of all.
Woohoo!
And the next thing that was right is I made myself a fresh cup of tea with mint from my garden and a little bit of honey. But what I realized is it tastes a little tiny bit like Dawn dish soap because I didn't wash it quite correctly. But having said that, if Dawn is good enough to clean oil slick ducks, then it's good enough for me.
I love you, Lance.
But I probably won't be shampooing with it soon.
Okay, don't do that. Yeah. Might make your skin just a wee bit dry.
Right.
Wow. From fresh mint from your garden. That's lovely. Lovely. So do you have a big garden?
No, tiny. It's more of an herb garden.
A little herb garden. Okay.
And what's right with you today, Caddy?
Well, let's see. Today is sunny and gorgeous. I get to be part of a garden tour that's happening very soon. It's a little neighborhood garden tour. So I've been able to get my hands in the dirt and I get to do it again tonight to get ready for the tour that's taking place. So I get to be with Mother Earth. That's where my place is. I found that my garden and no headphones, no music, no nothing is going on. I just kind of get in there with the weeds and all that crap. So that's my happy place.
I find it so important to be grounding in nature right now.
Yeah, for sure. So Lance is joining us. Aaron is unable to. So Lance, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us just a little bit about who you are, maybe what got you to this table.
Well, it's been a long journey, but one that started about 20 years ago, 18 years ago, back in Thailand when I lived there. And I had a really serious motorcycle accident that pretty much brought me back to the United States for good, kind of against my wishes, but that's what was in the cards. So in that time that I was back, I began a lot more isolation just because of coming back to the US after living overseas for so long is it's quite challenging.
I would imagine a huge adjustment.
Yeah. And I did it once before in college, but it was just a brief trip overseas to study abroad. But what happened this time was that I just had a challenging time back here. And so I ended up going to grad school, and that's really where my sort of idea of recovery started. However, my addiction actually brought me a little bit deeper through that process and eventually led me to treatment for the first time in, I want to say 2016, I think. And that was successful for about 6 months, but I didn't have the tools or the resources or the community around me to fully support, I think, what I needed personally.
Mm.
And through some introspection, I found out what that was later. But so another 4.5 years later, I found myself back in treatment again. And something in treatment just woke me up.
Wow.
And it wasn't, I won't say it was treatment itself, although the experience was good. And I made sure to spend time this time
Hmm.
trying to search my feelings and myself. But in fact, it was as simple as a singing bowl that
Wow.
sparked this light inside of me. And from then I said, I knew, and I said to myself, I get it now.
Wow. Isn't it amazing? So many times you talk about your two adventures in treatment and we think that's going to be the solution. But then there's this miraculous, probably Tibetan singing bowl or something that comes along and tings literally something in you, right?
It was an instant focus and a
Wow.
connection with nature at the same time. And it was like, oh, there's something greater here that
Hmm.
I'm not seeing. And that from that moment, I'm like, I get it. I get it. Um, from there on, I spent a few months staying in the treatment center, doing outpatient, and continued on to go to sober living for about 6 months.
Mm.
And that was probably the best time and investment of my life, because I wouldn't be where I am today without doing that. And where I am today, uh, while I was living in that sober house, I actually took the RCA at
The Recovery Coach
FFC.
Academy?
Yes,
That Minnesota Recovery Connection?
you know it.
Okay, yeah, I do.
Yes,
Quite
you
well.
should. I got the pleasure to take it with Caddy, and I can tell you 100%, Caddy is one of the most beautiful people I've ever met, just because
Aw.
she's just really lights a spark in people and
Mm.
really shines a light. And it was just a beautiful experience. And literally within 2 months of that course, I was working in a treatment center, in an opioid treatment center. Um, uh, MAT, I should say, but
Medicated assisted treatment.
yes,
Just for our listening audience, there's a
correct.
lot of acronyms in our world.
And from there, I suddenly got this job that I applied for randomly with Optum Behavioral Health, which is the behavioral health side of United Healthcare.
I remember when you applied for that and you were just like, yeah, I applied for this. And it's like, and then you got it. And you were kind of like shell shocked.
I was completely shell-shocked.
I know. I mean, and it was such an amazing thing because you have an individual who takes a class and begins to put themselves out there, and then you kind of moved around the recovery world for a while. And so what it happened was that you all of a sudden like found like this amazing position.
It happened so fast. It was definitely shell shock, and it turned out to be one of the greatest experiences up to date, job wise anyway. And what I do there is I get to I'm the recovery and resiliency, like, market lead is the corporate
title?
term. And what I do is I get to go around to the recovery community and provide trainings in things such as mental health first aid, suicide prevention, seeking safety, which is a trauma-informed training. It's just been a fascinating journey.
Wow, I can just hardly wait to have you share some of these things. Wow, that was a sharp in my voice. So, Lance, I've seen you on this journey and it's just so exciting. And the fact that I got to be part of it is just a gift that I get because I get to see people just like unfold and open up in front of me. So when we come back from our break, I'm going to have Lance kind of take a dive into his recovery and what he's been working on and all the different quests that he may have been on. And then he's going to tell us a little bit more about some of the true subjects that he takes great interest in that I get to participate in. So thank you for listening to Redefining Recovery, a Recovery Revolution. And we will see you back shortly. Thank you. Well. Hello, we are back, and I am sitting across the table from Lance Frederick, and I didn't throw an S on there because I know I got it. So I am with Lance, and he just talked about the fact that he took the peer recovery specialist class that we offer at Minnesota Recovery Connection that I get the absolute honor of being the lead trainer for, and I have an incredible team. And Lance was saying that I meant a lot to him in terms of the class and what I can bring. But, I look at him and I look at so many of the incredible students that I've been able to be part of their recovery journey, because it's not just about training a class. It's about seeing people's light bulbs go on and the journey that they get to go on while taking the class. And it's more of an honor for me sometimes than I think it is for people taking the class. So again, thank you, Lance, for being there.
Absolutely. I think one of the amazing things about MRC is the wide and broad audience that is brought in throughout the state, not just in the Twin Cities metro, but throughout the state, and how many connections there are throughout the state.
Yeah, it is. It's one of the things that we try very hard. I've got a class that starts next week. It's on Zoom for the peer recovery specialist training. And I've got, I think, 3 outstate students and one that might be coming in from Duluth. I just got an email today because he wants to get trained. And so when we can get into that greater community and get into some of the real hard and fast communities that are struggling, it really is a gift.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Lance kind of gave the speed version of his recovery journey. I'm going to ask him to just take a little bit more of a deeper dive into maybe some of the experiences that he had and what this recovery journey has looked like. So the floor is yours. I may pepper in a question here or there, so be prepared.
Sure. Where do you have a starting point that you're thinking of?
Maybe when you came back to the States from Thailand,
Sure.
you were probably struggling with a lot of different things coming back to the States, probably leaving some people and relationships behind. And I think you mentioned isolation was sort of one of the spaces. And I think that's not anything new for people that are struggling with substance use disorder, because all of a sudden they feel like their world is collapsed around them. And like, I'll just stay in my own little bubble and maybe hopefully not drowned.
Right. And the substance use it's a self-perpetuation of that loneliness and isolation as well. And that really was, you're correct. I was losing relationships. I was losing my sense of who I am, which has evolved tremendously, especially in the past few years. But when you kind of lose who you are and you don't know who to turn to, that one thing that I used to call a friend was always there.
Right.
And so it's just easy to fall into that rather than confront my needs head on.
So just so that the listening audience, your friend was alcohol specifically?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you dabble into anything else?
Oh, I've dabbled in a lot.
Okay. You've dabbled and dabbled.
But that alcohol was that's the thing that pulled me down the hardest and fastest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes I just like to have some clarifying questions for folks, because
Absolutely.
we in the recovery community, we sometimes don't mention our thing because we know what it is, but there are people out there who want to hear what it is that might have brought you to that very lonely, dark space.
True. And the fact that as you said, dabbled in other substances and other things, it allows me to have a better understanding of actually people who are addicted to some of those substances,
Right.
And have a lot more empathy for what they're going through. Recovery is recovery, and it looks different to everybody, but substance use, the addiction part of it is very similar for all of us. But it does help to sort of understand where a person is depending on what they're using.
Their chemical use. Yeah, that substance. Exactly. So tell us, you came back from Thailand and you were feeling alone and you...
Isolated. I thought that grad school would help me, and actually that perpetuated my use. And then
How did that perpetuate it? What was it that was happening in you?
There was a culture, there was
Yes.
an atmosphere, even in grad school. there's sort of a, I think in grad school, as a grad student, we think we're far superior than the undergrads as well. And
You're fancy.
yeah, right. No, but even just either whether it was a partying with people in grad school or going to the bar with professors, or it just became an everyday thing.
Yeah.
And so after that, what I realized, and I didn't finish grad school, by the way. All I had to do was finish my thesis and defend it, and I couldn't do it.
Wow.
That's how powerful
that
a
addiction
pull.
can be.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I ran away to San Francisco instead.
Oh, okay.
For
There you
4
go.
years. And I tortured somebody else there.
You did that geographical, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That's a very common thing that can happen with people. They're just like, okay, I'll just go someplace else and it'll all be air quotes fine.
It's all going to go away.
Yeah. And?
It didn't. As we all know in recovery, that doesn't always help things. Most often not. That was a very tough experience. I was kind of gently sent back to the Midwest, to Wisconsin, at the behest of my partner at the time. And I never went back.
Wow.
I think what happened is I came back, I realized that, or I shouldn't say I realized, somebody else made me realize that I have a problem. And it was a friend, and it was a friend who cared. It was a friend whose father was an alcoholic as well. And so she knew the signs, and she said something, and I said, I think you're right, and I'm going to go to treatment. And that was 2016. And treatment was interesting. It was great until until somebody decided to jump on my foot and break it while I was in treatment.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I left a week early because I couldn't stay the full time, because I couldn't take any medication for it other than Tylenol.
Ooh. And you were in pain, I would imagine.
In serious pain.
Yeah.
And fortunately, opioids weren't my substance of choice. So I was very cautious with those, particularly because I was just out of treatment.
Right.
But it sent me home to my parents. And I was kind of...
that would be a tough hit.
Yeah. I was kind of sort of stuck there for a while. After I started getting better, I started moving around more. We decided that, I was in Wisconsin. I don't know if they do it here, probably. They sold bottles by the bottle. Like, you didn't have to buy
of some sort of alcohol content.
Well, meaning beer.
Beer. Okay.
Yeah. So they sold bottles, which for me was like kind of a Disneyland for me at the time, because they had all these great beers, and I'm like, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that.
Okay. Yeah.
But but I first started, I'm like, I'll just have one. It's going to be fine.
So is this kind of like you had it in a brown bag, kind of that whole, not maybe literally, but it's like, I'll just have one. And just, like you said, just try it.
Just one.
Just an adventure.
I can handle one.
Sure. Yeah.
Why not?
Jeez.
Well, we know where that story goes. One turns into many.
Just like when you're at happy hour, and if you're a person who did happy hour like I did, it's like, okay, you rack up one happy hour, 2 for 1, and then you start adding them onto the bar so that you have, until the happy hour is over, you're all set up for probably not that long, but they're there waiting for you. Yeah. So that one turns into many.
One turns into many. And then that loneliness and all that stuff comes back, and started working a job in a factory there. And what do you call it? We made servers, and it was not fun.
No.
And that didn't help. And so that one that turned into many turned into many, many, many more. And from beer to vodka, which is common, but not always the case. That leads to cheap vodka, which is the grossest stuff in the world.
But hey, it does the job, because as you said earlier, it's your friend. It never lets you down.
It
may not taste great, but it never lets you down.
It didn't let me down until I almost started letting myself down, to the point where I was having ideations of suicide.
Oh,
just because I didn't know where to turn.
that misery was really
The
coming in.
Yeah, it was beyond, is more than just misery. It was
Mm,
misery, it was shame,
mm,
it was guilt, it
mhm.
was feeling sorry for myself and for, and just thinking not again, but thinking that maybe the world doesn't need me. Maybe I'm better off
Not.
not.
Yeah. No, I mean, I imagine there are folks, myself included. I had one real moment of where I contemplated maybe just not being is easier, and that's a space that is, like you said, beyond misery because it's so hard.
It's really hard. It got to the point where those ideations turned into more than ideations, turned into maybe how I'd do it,
Mm,
maybe where I'd do it.
mm,
And then thinking about others' reactions to it was tough,
yeah.
uh, even though it's in my mind and I'm projecting, I guess. But thinking about others' reactions was tough. But at the end of the day, it'd be like they'd be so much happier without me.
Oh,
So that's how tough it got.
oh, I'm so sorry, Lance.
Um, and sadly, well, I shouldn't say sadly. Fortunately, it got to the point where I was at home. I was talking with my parents. I was telling them that I had these ideations and that I did not have a positive response from
Hmm.
my family, which was very difficult, or one family member, which was very difficult. And they essentially turned to me and said, "You're just using that as an excuse to drink more." And
Oh.
that was hard, man.
Mm.
So hard.
And that's why we have some of these conversations, Lance, is because sometimes family members, maybe not because they don't care, but they don't know how to
They're
respond.
not informed.
No, and more importantly, you hear that from a child and you're terrified of what that could mean. So there's that response of inappropriateness, but they don't know any better.
It's strictly out of fear,
Yeah. Yeah.
strictly. And there's a lot of forgiveness for that response,
Mhm.
after what I've learned and what I do now,
Right.
with suicide prevention. And so there's forgiveness there. There's no hard feelings to that family member. However, I will say it was incredibly challenging. I could feel my whole body just in like goosebumps out of like panic and fear and shame and
Oh,
everything. So it was such a harsh response, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later, and how to inform society about suicide and talk about it openly, etc. But at that moment, it was harsh.
oh, I mean, when you said that, it brought up it in that moment, you already were feeling the pain of the addiction to alcohol that you had, and you're feeling so low. Somebody responds in a way that they don't know how to respond differently. And what that does is that catapults you again into that shame and that misery and that why am I here and what am I doing? So we've talked about the impact of how people can care for their humans that are struggling. And it really ultimately it comes from a place of love and care. Try not to over respond because that's what it sounded like this individual did. And they because they didn't know how to. So just take a breath. People who are hearing people that are struggling, it's like take a breath and say, I love you. If that person would have said that, that might have been a very different response you would have had, even just literally in that moment and physically, right?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of what I'm trying to do is how do we change our responses to someone who says something like that,
Hmm.
or maybe we have an indication that somebody's struggling, so we can change our response. We don't. You're right. We need to just take a moment and kind of center ourselves in our heart, and just to have a little more empathy for what we just heard.
Hmm. Yeah, and it could be a suicidal ideation, but it also could be somebody who is thinking about going out and having a drink after they have
Yep.
been off the substance for a while. And what could that? It's like, hey, you know what? I care so much about you that going to your local tavern sounds like it might not be in your best interest. What could we do instead of that? Versus, no, don't go to the bar. That's really bad. You're already an alcoholic. Da, 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 da. That's sometimes how people will respond because they're afraid, right?
Absolutely. And this is the big discussion around stigma in society around these issues. We have so much stigma in our society. And being in the field, I probably don't experience it as much because I'm not as attuned to the stigma. But when I see it, it is incredibly shocking to me that people could be so, I don't know, people could be so aside themselves, probably mostly out of fear, but there's a lot of apathy out there as well. So trying to change the discussion from that fear and that apathy into empathy and understanding, or at least maybe not understanding is the right word, but at least the empathy and our response is coming from our hearts instead of our heads.
Exactly. Coming from that space inside us versus where we want to be cerebral about it.
Right.
You shouldn't be doing that. Well, you're right. I shouldn't be, but I am. And so now what do I do? I care about you. I love you. I want you to stay with me in any way, shape, or form. So what could we do together? And it's all about that, bringing people, family together. If it's family, but family is chosen family, community is chosen community, all those different spaces. So I know you've sort of been on a spiritual quest over time that I've known you, and you're very solid in your recovery, as each day we have to sort of look at our recovery. But tell us about that journey that you've taken.
Yeah, it's interesting because I would say that I wasn't on this spiritual quest, or maybe I wasn't looking for it, but it was looking for me.
Beautiful.
And I think through understanding that process of this is looking for me, and I'm not religious, by the way. I'm very secular. I do lean toward a lot of Buddhist practices and Hindu practices and things like that. But there's a lot of value in every major religion, actually, if we look to what the true meaning of the words are, and not necessarily a literal meaning as we often find in society that promotes a lot of shame and hate and all of that stuff. But we won't get into that today.
We'll just sort of sidestep that and go right back to where Lance came from.
Right. So, I said it was looking for me. So at the time when I realized that it was looking for me, I kind of stepped into this space that it was very unfamiliar to me. I shouldn't say that. I guess I've had experiences in my past where you could say they were quote unquote spiritual experiences, but it was just this moment where because I found it, and when I did start investigating it, so to speak, it became more and more profound. And it's just been this journey of seeking.
Wow.
And when you're a seeker, you become a creator, and you're able to create your own world.
And you created what was maybe within you, but it came to you, and you were open to it. And I think that comes with recovery too. Sometimes we can be struggling, and we can be told what we should do, but when we're given the option of what we can do for ourselves, for our recovery, and then people sort of enhance that with ideas like around spiritual or environmental, or there's so many pathways to recovery that we can follow. Many people find religion in a sense, but that spiritual part, like you said, can be so many different things. I mean, I find myself just recently sitting on my sofa. I've gotten back into coloring. I know that sounds kind of dorky, but you know what? I just go right into that space. It's after dark because I can't go in the garden anymore. Dusk is hit and I can't dig in the dirt anymore. But I just go into this space where I get to be creative. And that's my happy space.
That's it. And it doesn't take more than that necessarily. It could just be as simple as a coloring book, or writing in a journal, or, connecting with yourself or your higher self or whatever you want to call it. And just breathing for a minute connecting, and then writing, kind of free flow writing is a really good way to do that as well. But whatever your modality is, you're able to connect with something beyond yourself in
Right.
some way,
Yeah. Yeah.
and maybe transmute some of those feelings that were inside you all day that you weren't able to let go of.
Hmm.
And it just kind of lets everything out.
Yeah.
And then it turns into this beautiful pattern on the paper that you just colored.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people, many people in recovery, outside of recovery, we're all working. We've all got, relationships, whatever that might look like. We've got communities that we're involved in. And I think you said something that's really important, and that is we have all this stuff locked up inside us. And if we keep it locked up, then that can sometimes make the head get a little bit confused and don't know where to go. And so then you're looking for that release valve. You're looking for that mechanism. You're looking for that air quotes friend that we can rely on, that substance or those substances. And then what happens is that we come sometimes step back into old behavior, because those behaviors never go away. They just get further and further away, but they're still there. And so, when you can find that path that gives you that place to breathe and dump it on a page, dump it in a garden, dump it in playing a game. We need to release this stuff that gets us all locked up in our heads. So,
100%. I was just going to say that, particularly in the summertime, we have this opportunity to be outside as much as we can, when there aren't storms. And we've had a few. But nature is such a wonderful healing experience because it can take everything from us if we let it. We can and I guess we call it grounding. And we just put our bare feet in the grass or run some water over our toes or whatever the case may be. Any connection with nature is truly healing. And well, at least it has been for me, but I know with your gardening, it must be as well.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Even going for a walk around even a city block
Yeah.
and looking at the trees, looking at the ground, looking at the flowers, looking at the clouds. I mean, I found myself sitting in the backyard, just in my little zippy back chair and just like staring at the clouds.
I sat in that chair, I think.
Oh, yes, you did. You sat in my backyard. You sat in my chair. And I just find myself now looking up at the clouds. And I'm like, what are you going to show me? Am I going to see a clown? Am I going to see a rhinoceros? Am I going to see, Gumby? I don't know.
What's changed from childhood to today in the clouds?
Yeah.
Like nothing.
No.
Like they're still going to show us what they show us.
Yeah.
And it's fun to look.
Yeah. And it's important to take that mental break. Just mental break, just disconnect. And I think there's a disconnect in a negative way, and there's a disconnect in a positive way. And where you're doing it consciously, saying, you know what, I'm just going to tap out. A good friend of mine told me the other day, Caddy, asked me, do you meditate? I'm like, well, she's like, okay, now let me rephrase that. Do you ever just take time when you're not thinking about stuff? And I'm like, oh yeah, I do that. Not all the time, but I do it enough. And she's like, so think of that as your meditation time. I was like, well, darn tootin', what a great idea. And I think what it did is it gave me freedom to sit in the backyard in that chair that you sat in for a while and just look up at the clouds and go, this could be considered a meditation because I'm just kind of being.
It is a meditation, and that's exactly what meditation is. It is just being. There's nothing more than that.
Yeah.
You can certainly do different types of meditations, but essentially you're just being and experiencing.
Yeah. And I think in our American society and in our got to get stuff done, got to be productive, got to do kind of society, it can be overwhelming. To that point, when we come back from break, I'm going to have Lance talk about the work that he's doing at Optum. And we're going to maybe take a little venture into something that he sort of gave us a sneak peek at, was a part of his suicidal ideation that he had. And this is a training that I get to bring into Minnesota Recovery Connections Recovery Coach Academy that has been extraordinarily educational. So we will see you back in a moment.
There's no song, and this house needs love in it, 'cause without it there's no home. And there's one thing that I've learned through this year.
Love this music.
Right?
Isn't it fabulous?
Great.
To that point, if I could only remember the name of this band, they are going to be playing at our Walk for Recovery September 21st.
What?
Yes.
A band?
Yes, several. A band, he says?
I guess we've had them in the past.
Yes, we have had him in the past, but this is one that's going to be at the Walk for Recovery. My apologies, I cannot remember the name. Erin is my total co-host on that one. She remembers. But yeah, we just want to remind everybody that we have the Walk for Recovery on September 21st from 10 until 3 at the state capitol. And our presenting sponsor is New Way Alliance. So we always want to give them great thanks, as well as many other sponsors. So Lance, I'd like you to talk about one of the things that I mentioned when we went off to break is that we have worked together training, or not. I've been sort of a watcher of your training on QPR, question, persuade, refer. Tell us what you've been doing with that.
So QPR is a training that I do through Optum United Healthcare, and that I get to bring to the community, particularly the recovery community. And to make sure everybody's aware, the recovery community extends beyond the substance use community to the mental health community as well.
Absolutely.
So, and we know that substance use and mental health go hand in hand. And one of the things that I've been able to do through my job is bring QPR, the question, persuade, refer, which is a suicide prevention gatekeeper training, we call it. And so I get to train these lovely humans who are in recovery about suicide prevention and how to bring about a discussion with somebody if somebody is unsure of let's not say unsure, if somebody has a question about whether or not somebody may be considering suicide, how to approach that person.
Right, because it's probably one of the hardest things that anybody might have to bring up. But when somebody says something, we must listen. And that's what you've taught me.
100%. And the main focus of the training is when in doubt, if you have any doubt whatsoever, ask the question, ask the person about suicide or their intentions if they have any. And it's just best to ask and not be afraid to ask, just to be sure. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're joking about suicide or killing themselves. But even somebody joking about it, if you ask the question, shines a light on that, and hopefully that person would reconsider the language that they use next time.
And there's a classic one that Caddy has, a very good friend. I'll leave the name nameless, but if that person who happens to be male would ever listen to the show, he might know. I was at a restaurant and I won't even use the statement, but I was using a statement that was particularly harmful about doing something to myself, but I was saying it jokingly, and he looked at me dead in the eyes. Oh, probably shouldn't have said that word. He looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Caddy, are you having any suicidal thoughts or ideations?" And I looked at him like he was, what? And he said, "You've made this comment over and over again, and it really concerned me." And I was like, oh my gosh, I never said it ever again, except for describing this situation. So you're right. People can use strange statements, but we need to step into that space. And it happened to me.
Right. And it's hopefully the person is willing to have a learning experience in that moment. But just asking the question alone, are you thinking about suicide, or are you considering suicide, or have you thought about it? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Just asking that simple question could potentially save a life. And regardless of whether you know what to do next, it doesn't matter. But what I would tell everybody in the audience that is listening, if ever you're in doubt, ask the question. If you don't have resources available, which is incredibly important that somebody is able to find the help that they need, one can always dial 988, which used to be the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. It was an 800 number that they've reduced to 3 simple numbers, 988. So if you're struggling or unsure what to do, please dial that number.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that you've trained in the class, and that is if I were to say, Lance, are you considering suicide? There's a myth behind that says that you might be suggesting it to someone and they might take action on it. And that is absolutely the opposite, correct?
Correct. Thanks for bringing that up, Caddy. It is important, really important to know that even if you ask somebody a question who's not thinking about it, you are not going to put the idea of suicide in someone's head. Either they're thinking about it or they're not.
Mhm.
So it is truly as black and white as that.
Yeah.
And so just asking that question might provide somebody with a lot of relief and allow them to open up and begin to talk about it if they're ready to.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, if you are at all curious about this topic and you're interested, QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer, is a class that can be taken. It's free generally, correct?
Generally, it's free, yes. There are, you can look at I believe it's the QPR Institute.
Mhm.
They have a website, and I believe you can find QPR gatekeeper trainers on that website. I am one of them. If you or your organization is looking to have this type of training, it's about an hour and 15 minutes. Yeah, certainly reach out to myself or through Caddy, or you can look on their website and you should be able to find my name. But yeah, so there are resources available.
Yeah. And I think just having had back in the day, there was a young woman in one of the groups that I attended. She made a phone call to her sponsor at the time and was having definite ideations, had methods, had notes, had things, but she made the phone call and we all came charging to her side, and she was having a psychological moment, break, if I should say that. And she got into some mental health services, and she is wonderful and beautiful to this day. But sometimes people will give you signs, and that's what this training will give you. It gives you the myths, it gives you the things to look for. We only have a couple minutes late. Tell the listening audience one of the questions that you ask in the beginning of the class and sort of the change that has happened over time.
Yeah, this is interesting, particularly post-COVID, where suicide in the United States has gone up, has risen pretty significantly. I believe we're about 50,000 or so, like right around that number per year of Americans who die by suicide. And so one of the, sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah. What is that initial question when you
the
start,
initial
like,
question
yeah.
that I asked the class is
Mhm.
how many people are affected by suicide in one way or another, either personally or tangentially. Could be somebody in the community, could be a family member, etc. And in most of the classes that I go to, we are above 85% of the courses.
The hands go
The
up.
hands go up.
Yeah. And I remember when Lance started doing this not too long ago, it might have been about 50%. And then now it has just, in the most heart-wrenching way, the hands have risen. And it's something that we just need to be very aware of when that people give us sideways signals, give away things, talk about it, say they're not worthy of being around. What are some of the quick statements that can be made?
That I want you around, that I love you, because
Mhm.
this has to come from the heart space as well, is that I love you and I want you around. You're my friend, you're my family member, whoever the
Mhm.
person is. You know, there's always a light. I think Katie and I were talking about this before, is once a light shines in that darkness, the darkness cowers. And so we can all be that shining light
Light.
for somebody.
Absolutely. Well, what a beautiful note to end this on, this beautiful conversation, Lance. It has been an absolute pleasure to have
Thank
you.
you.
And
It's so fun to be here.
Yeah, so great. And our recovery voice is everywhere. It's in many different spaces and places, and we all do amazing things. So I just want to thank everybody for listening, and Redefining Recovery, a recovery revolution, given to us by Minnesota Recovery Connection. You can catch us on any of your podcasting listening pleasures. You can go to the AM 950 website and look it up there. I just want to thank Lance. Lance, say goodbye to the folks.
Thank you for having me, everybody.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful, and we'll see you again.